Today we're looking at 1 Corinthians 13, maybe one of the best known passages in the Bible. Even people who don't go to church have heard of 1 Corinthians 13. We call it the love chapter. It's used in weddings galore. I use a portion of it in my wedding services. And a lot of times we associate it with romantic love. We like the topic of love, though sometimes we find love hard to define. I found a list from some kids. I like getting the kids' quotes. So Greg, who was 8, said, "Love is the most important thing in the world, but baseball is pretty good too." I thought of the Krolls, May 9 said, "No one's really sure why love happens, but I heard it has something to do with how you smell. That's why perfume and deodorant are so popular." Very logical thinking. Roger, 9, not that Roger, but a different Roger, says, "Falling in love is like an avalanche where you have to run for your life." Poor Roger. Leo, 7, said, "If falling in love is anything like learning how to spell, I don't want to. It takes too long." And Bobby, who was 8, said, "Love will find you even if you're trying to hide from it. I've been trying to hide from it since I was 5, but the girls keep finding me." When Paul wrote this chapter, he was not thinking about weddings or romance. Though, can I say, if you treat your spouse like this, your romantic love will not be harmed. Chapter 13 comes right in the middle of a discussion on spiritual gifts. Remember last week we talked about how the Corinthians were disputing with each other, and they were elevating some gifts above the others. Next week we're going to look at some of the abuse of some of the gifts and how it was tearing up their worship services. And this chapter comes right in the middle of it. Paul's still addressing the disputes and the divisions in the Corinthian church. Remember, they had cliques. They sued each other. They treated some members like second-class citizens because of their socioeconomic status and their particular spiritual gift. So let's pick it up at the last verse of chapter 12. "Now eagerly desire the greater gifts, and yet I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of men, of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy, and I can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we will see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these 3 remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love." One commentator said that looking at this chapter is like dissecting a flower in order to understand it. But if you tear it apart too much, you lose the beauty. So today we're going to try to examine the parts without marring the whole thing. The first thing that Paul is saying is that love is needed. He uses the word agape for love. Now there are 4 Greek words for love. So let's take a quick look at them so that we can understand why Paul chose this particular word. The first is eros, and that refers to sexual love. We get the word erotic from it. It can also mean a love that wants something, a desirous love. So that's why it gets thrown in with the sexual love. It didn't always have to be sexual. The second word is storge, and that's family love, like the love of a parent for a child. or other family members as well. Phileo is brotherly love. Love, affection, friendship is where we get the Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. That comes from that. Agape is talking about an unchanging love. It's a self-giving love that doesn't expect anything in return. It's a love so great that it can be given to the unlovable or the unappealing. Agape love comes from the one who loves. And the object or the person being loved does not have to have any redeeming value. It would be like your old teddy bear that to you has significance, and you love that torn up, worn out, one-eyed, no-eared little bear. I'm just thinking hypothetically. Nobody else would look at that and go, oh, that's beautiful. That's a lovable thing. But you love that old teddy bear, right? Agape love loves even when it's rejected. It loves because it chooses to love. It has little to do with emotion and a lot to do with self-denial for the sake of somebody else. So we can read this chapter and we can think that Paul is saying, well, if you're unfriendly in your life, it means nothing. But agape isn't really friendliness. It is self-denial for the sake of another. And we get an idea when we read this which gifts the Corinthians thought were the most important here. Remember, they kind of elevated some. Paul starts right out. He switches to the first person, so he owns it. He says, well, if I do this, which makes it a little more palatable than if he said, well, since you guys do this, da-da-da-da-da. So he just owns it. He says, listen, if I do this, if I speak in the tongues of men or angels but don't have love, I am only a resounding gong. All the gifts were given by God. Remember, Paul said that last week. And so the Corinthians had no business gloating or boasting about their gift or thinking less of somebody else because their gift wasn't so public or because it wasn't so noticeable. And so what Paul is saying here is that whatever we do is useless without agape love, without the love of God. In the first century, there was a big gong or a cymbal at the entrance of most pagan temples. And so when people came to worship, they would hit this gong or the cymbal in the hope that it would wake up the pagan god so he would hear their prayers. And Paul's saying, even if he were so blessed that he could speak with great eloquence every human tongue known to men, every angelic language, it would be useless, just like the ridiculous act of banging a gong or a cymbal to try to wake up a non-existent God. It would be useless. A cymbal in a band sounds great with the band, doesn't it? Like you think of the 1812 overture? I want to make sure I got the right year. Dun, 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 and those cymbals are going. But let me tell you, if you just stand next to somebody with a pair of cymbals and they're clanging it, that is not a pleasant noise, is it? You see drum sets in some church. They have the drum cage, they would call it, the plexiglass thing. That is not nearly as much for the audience as it is for the singers standing right in front of the drums. Because if you've had to stand there and play a guitar or try to sing, and they're hitting those cymbals back there, it will damage your hearing. It's excruciating. So not only is the noise useless, it's harsh. And Paul's saying without love, whatever I do is useless and it's harsh. Love is more important than knowledge, he says. We can know everything about nuclear science, medicine, philosophy, psychology, theology, but if we still don't have love, we're nothing. You ever been around somebody that knew everything to the point of being obnoxious? Especially when they claim to know their Bible. One church I pastored, I was there, I don't know, it was the first week or two I was there, and I'd gone to Walmart afterwards. And, I was up front that Sunday, so they could all see me, and they knew who I was, and I didn't know them well enough to know who it was. And I was at Walmart, and this lady caught me and said, "Hi, Pastor, I'm so-and-so, go to the church. You're going to love our church. We know our Bibles so well." And I remember thinking, well, that's good, but I wonder how much of it you do. And can I tell you, it was the toughest church I ever pastored. They had a lot of head knowledge, but they did not want to put it into practice. Paul's saying it doesn't matter how much you know. It's what you do in love. And then, this is kind of unbelievable, he says love is more important than faith. Now, he's not saying that faith is not important. Remember, Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. What he is saying is that love is preeminent. You might have the faith to move mountains, but without love, you might just set that mountain down in somebody else's way, or you might set it down on top of them. And he says that love is even more important than generosity and sacrifice. When he talks about, this translation talks about, I lost it. Let me back up and I'll tell you what this translation says. Give my body over to hardship. Some of it talks about burning, so they don't know if that means like, letting them put a brand on you that you were a slave or some of those things, or if he's talking about being burned at the stake or whatever it is. Whatever it is, it's painful. He says you can be a martyr. You can give your body over to that, but if you're just doing it without love, it doesn't mean anything. There were actually people who thought, since Jesus said, "Blessed are the persecuted," that they got a blessing for being persecuted, and so they'd volunteer for that kind of thing. He's saying that's not what gets the blessing. That's not what's effective. Can I just tell you, I do not volunteer rationally for things that involve pain. If you see me doing that, you know there's something wrong. Come save me. And then he goes on, he says, so love's most important. So let's talk about what love is, right? He goes on to discuss love's nature in verses 4-7. Love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't envy. It doesn't boast, it's not proud, it doesn't dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Let's look first at what love doesn't do. Now, I also want you to think about what we've been looking at with the Corinthians and what their issues were. And if you look at this list, what love doesn't do is exactly what the Corinthians were doing. He gets kind of personal here. Love doesn't envy. Instead of wishing I had what you have, love lets me celebrate what God has given you without being jealous of it for myself. Love doesn't boast. That word literally means being a braggart. It can also mean being a windbag. I would choose windbag. I think that sounds good. I would put that in my translation. Love does not brag about what I have or what I've done. Boasting is really trying to convince others that they should love you, that they should like you, that they should respect you. It's a desire to have people drawn to you. But can I tell you, it usually has the opposite effect. The more you hear people tell you how much other people love them, the less likely you are to love them, aren't you? Everybody loves me. Well, subtract one from that list, please. I'm so good at this, Those are the kind of people you have a conversation with them, and no matter what you do, they've done one more, right? Oh, I got this little scar here. Oh, that's nothing. You should see my scars. I had a cough last week. I had pneumonia last week. Always something more. They always got to be more. Proud. Love's not proud. The word here means to blow up or to puff up. Boasting is wanting others to think highly of you. Pride is thinking too highly of yourself. Remember, everything that we have is from God. Even our strengths. We don't even get to brag about our strengths because they came from God. Doesn't allow us any room for pride. Love's not rude. Love doesn't behave in an ugly, indecent, or obscene manner. Love is not self-seeking. In fact, that's the polar opposite of agape love. True love doesn't seek to build itself up, but to build others up. Love's not easily angered. A person living under the influence of love is not prone to be easily irritated or to lose their temper or to get violent. It's serious. This is what kept Moses out of the promised land. He got provoked and irritated at the children of Israel, so instead of speaking to the rock like he was supposed to, he whacked it. And God said, all right, you don't get to go to the promised land. Serious business. Love doesn't keep record of wrongs. Now that's an accounting term, meaning that we don't add up and itemize the failures of others. We don't keep that box of receipts. I got to tell you, we have been on a project the last couple of years to clean out our basement and get rid of stuff. And so I've got boxes of magazines and stuff. And, I used to be a journalist, and so I've got boxes of magazines and stuff where I got an article in it. And I came across a box. It was tax receipts from 1993. Which means, and as a pastor, there's different things, housing allowance, and I have to justify what I use the housing allowance on. So we kept receipts back in those days, back when we used paper. In 1999, I moved that box to California. In 2001, I moved that box to Tennessee. In 2004, I moved it back to Iowa. I could have thrown it away before we moved to California. It was a heavy box full of paper. And I thought about that box when I was reading this, and I thought, that's exactly like unforgiveness, right? We carry around unnecessary weighted garbage because we won't forgive somebody. And love doesn't do that. Love doesn't keep an account of that. Instead of being so hard on people who sin differently than we do, let's learn to give grace by cutting others some slack. Let's let people out of jail. Love doesn't delight in evil. I think it means that love doesn't look for the opportunity for revenge. I'll get it back. Love doesn't enjoy seeing others hurt, even if it's that person. Love doesn't rejoice at their sin. Love wants the best for others. All those things were taking place in the Corinthian church. That's why they were taking each other to court. That's why they were arguing. That's why they thought they were better than the others, that their gift was better, that they were richer, so they were better. All those things were coming because they were doing what love was not. So what is love? Well, Paul says love is patient. That word basically means someone who is able to avenge himself or herself, but refrains from doing so. It carries with it the idea of perseverance. It also tells us that there's provocation. Love doesn't have to be patient if there's no provocation, but we're people. We provoke others. And so it's necessary for us to be patient. People are going to fail us. They're going to hurt us, even if they don't intend to. Love is kind. Love volunteers to help others when they're in need, whether it's a polite word, an encouraging word, or physically helping out. The word literally means to show oneself useful. And when we have and when we show God's love, it's going to be seen in simple acts of kindness. A wonderful measure of kindness, I think, is to see how children receive us. Children don't receive and respond well to unkind people. When I was working at the elementary school, I worked with a couple people. One was incredibly kind. One was not. And it was amazing at recess to watch where the kids flocked. If they needed something, they might go to the other person, but they flocked around the kind person. It was really fun to watch. And I tell you, when I think of Jesus, that's what I think of. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been any problem with the disciples having to scoot kids away from him. They wanted to be around Jesus. I just see him crawling all over him. I see him laughing. because kids like to be around kind people. Love rejoices in the truth. Now, that's the opposite of evil. Instead of locking into the vices of others, love celebrates and applauds the virtues around us. And it says love protects. Some versions say love bears all things or covers all things. It carries the idea of enduring or putting up with something. And so for the sake of the gospel, love puts up with different and difficult circumstances. 1 Peter 4:8 says, above all, love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. Love doesn't share its hurts with everybody. Love doesn't gossip. Charles Spurgeon said that we should be like an oyster that covers a grain of sand. Here's what he said. A hurtful particle intrudes itself in its shell, and this vexes and grieves it. It cannot eject the evil. And what does it do but cover it with a precious substance extracted from its own life, by which it turns the intruder into a pearl? Oh, that we would do so with the provocations we receive from our fellow Christians, so that pearls of patience, gentleness, long-suffering, and forgiveness might be bred in us by that which has harmed us. I really like that illustration. We take what would irritate us, and we bear with it, and we let God make a pearl out of it. Love always trusts. We choose to believe the best about others. We don't lose faith in others, even if they've messed up or hurt us. We resist the temptation to think the worst. We delight in giving people second and third chances. Now, Paul's not talking about being naive here or ignoring the facts. Sadly enough, sometimes we have to deal with some facts. And the facts don't turn out so good sometimes. But we're not quick to believe rumors, or we're not quick to think the worst. Love always hopes. Despite the current situation, love believes things will get better. Love sees the potential. No matter how bleak things look, love holds on to God's power to change things. And love endures, perseveres. It literally means to remain under. Love hangs in there with others in long-term relationships, even when the pressure is there, even when there's a burden there. It doesn't quit. Listen, we're going to spend eternity with each other, so we might as well get along now. I think the best way to understand these qualities is to see them in the life of Jesus. We could replace the word love with the name Jesus, and that description would make perfect sense. What happens if I replace my name there? Paul goes on, and he tells us why love is so important. Love is never ending. Love never fails, he says. That's a bridge between those acts of love and the emphasis on love's enduring character. Paul compares it to the temporary gifts of prophecy, tongues, and knowledge. Those gifts are going to cease when we get to heaven. He says, childish things are appropriate for children. And so for now, these gifts, they're appropriate. But the gifts of the Holy Spirit are not going to be appropriate in heaven. They're not going to be needed. When we see Jesus fully, not just as a reflected image, then the need for gifts will have vanished. The gifts are going to be overshadowed by the presence of Jesus. I think of it the same way as why I turn my porch lights off in the morning. I don't need the lesser light because the sun is out. When we are perfected in the presence of Christ, there's not going to be a need for spiritual gifts, but love will still exist. John tells us in 1 John 4 that God is love. It is his very nature. And so when we're perfected in the presence of Christ, there won't be a need for spiritual gifts, but love will still exist. Today when we look in a mirror, we see a pretty good, clear image most of the time. Might not be an image we like, but we see it pretty clearly, right? But in ancient days, a mirror was made of polished metal, and so the image was always a little unclear, a bit distorted. But one day, we are going to see Jesus with perfect clarity, and we're going to enjoy perfect fellowship. And when we're in heaven, faith and hope will have fulfilled their purpose. We won't need faith when we see God face to face. We won't need hope in the coming of Jesus once he comes. It'll all be realized. But we will always love the Lord and each other and grow in that love through eternity. So Paul can say the greatest of these is love, because love is eternal. So let's summarize. Just go love everybody. Kidding. So I think some of the things that we can summarize here. Let's love in action, not in abstraction. Agape love acts, right? Words are cheap. We can tell our brothers and sisters in Christ that we love them, but do we put our words into action? Can I tell you, if love can be commanded, then it's not an emotion. You can't command somebody to be happy or sad. True love is not an emotion. It's a decision. It's an action. Love is the tool with which God builds up the body of Christ. And love for unbelievers is the bridge over which the gospel can cross. Next, love those who are close to us. Somebody once said, "To love the whole world for me is no chore. The only real problem is my neighbor next door." If we're not just demonstrating love to those closest to us, then how can we expect to do so in other relationships? No matter how inconsiderate you think your spouse is, or how disrespectful your children are, how unreasonable our parents are, love them. Love those who are different than us. We tend to gravitate to those who are like us, don't we? Don't let that lead you to have a negative attitude toward people who look different than you, who live in a different neighborhood, who have a different lifestyle, who listen to different music, whatever. Love them with the love of Christ. Love those who disagree with us. Love those who annoy us. That's a hard one, isn't it? Like, why did Paul have to say always love, right? Or in all things love? Could he have said most things or some things love? But he said all things, right? That's hard when we think people are stupid. I love John Wayne's quote, "Life is hard, it's even harder when you're stupid." But we don't get an exemption card. If you're struggling with loving somebody, confess that to God. Don't make excuses for an unloving attitude. Own it before God and be willing to let him change your heart. And another way to do that is to focus on God's love for you. Read portions of Scripture about God's love and mercy. Think about how God loved you even before you became a Christian, while you were still messed up and still a sinner. Allow his love to be a reservoir that you can draw from to love others. This theme of agape love, that's the core of Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Behind all the divisiveness, behind all the puffed up self-importance, all the cliquish activity, all the gossip, the Corinthians suffered from self-centered pride. And Paul says the antidote to that is love. Love that acts, love that serves, love that builds up another. He introduced the chapter by saying, "I'm going to show you a most excellent way." Besides sounding like Bill and Ted, the most excellent way. But he has. And now he ends by saying that love is the greatest gift of all, better than faith, better even than hope. Keep the faith, don't lose hope, And above all else, let your lives be filled with Christ's love. And then let that divine love flow out of you into your church family and everyone you meet. Let's pray.